A power struggle this Tuesday night. The new back and forth between Ontario's Premier.
I want to sit down and negotiate this and stop the bleeding.
And America's President.
Our country had to do this.
What could happen next? Buying Canadian. It's complicated.
Patriotism is not just about putting a maple leaf on a product.
What customers are being urged to consider. Potential ceasefire, what Ukraine has agreed to just hours after bombarding Moscow. And anger amps up towards Tesla.
People were suggesting that it was a symbolism of Nazi.
The accelerating backlash against Elon Musk's car company.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with fast-moving developments on Canada's escalating trade war with the U.S. After Ontario's Premier put a 25% surcharge on electricity sold to the U.S. and threatened to cut off electricity sales completely to the U.S., Trump hit back. He vowed to double tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel from 25% to 50%. Posting on social media, can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity that so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat? Well, after that, Doug Ford says the U.S. Commerce Secretary called him and offered what Ford calls an olive branch. Ford took it and is now suspending his surcharge on electricity sold to the U.S.
By no means are we just going to roll over, because we don't roll over to anyone. Both parties are heated and the temperature needs to come down.
Late today, Trump suggested he too could reverse course. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
He was a gentleman.
It's not the normal disrespect shown to Canada.
You know, there's a very strong man in Canada.
A compliment from the U.S. President towards Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose decision to put a 25% surcharge on electricity sold to the states looked like it would escalate the trade war early Tuesday.
There would be grave consequences imposed on Canada if they think about shutting off electricity for the United States.
Consequences like Trump threatening a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and aluminum starting Wednesday.
The president saw the Premier, Doug Ford, make an egregious and insulting comment threatening to shut down electricity for the American people.
A White House worried about egregious and insulting comments despite reiterating their desire to annex Canada.
People of Canada would pay much less tax. It makes a lot of sense. And by the way, when you take away that artificial line that looks like it was done with a ruler.
On CNBC, Doug Ford was clear about what he needed done.
President Trump gets rid of the tariffs 100%. We sit down on at the table, discuss a new USMCA deal.
But just hours later, Ford blinked, dropping Ontario's electricity tax without the U.S. canceling their tariffs after Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick called.
He has to bounce it off the president, but I'm pretty confident he will pull back.
But when Trump spoke, he was non-committal.
The 50% tariffs,
I'll let you know about it.
Leaving it up to the White House to clear the air. No 50% steel and aluminum tariffs tomorrow, just the 25% tax that had already been promised on an industry worth $35 billion to Canada.
Already, just with the threat of the tariffs, many of our members have lost U.S. orders.
Getting the tariffs off, a key part of what Ford, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, and Lutnick will discuss when they meet in Washington on Thursday. But that's little solace for aluminum workers set to be laid off.
It's a pissing contest, you know. I mean, it's an ego trip by one person.
Incoming Prime Minister Mark Carney said Canada will keep tariffs on until the Americans show respect and commitment to fair trade, with the Finance Minister adding, Donna, that Canada will firmly and proportionally act against U.S. tariffs.
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. Investors are trying to ride all this uncertainty. It was another wild day on Wall Street. The Dow dropped more than 450 points. The TSX, the S&P, and the Nasdaq are all down again. Investors worried the trade war will slow growth. The Canadian dollar is still hovering just below 70 cents U.S. Hudson's Bay customers are being urged to use their gift cards as soon as possible now that the company has been granted creditor protection. Canada's oldest retailer can't pay its bills and is trying to avoid bankruptcy. It plans to restructure its debt. Up to half the Bay's 80 stores could close. The judge who granted creditor protection said it's hard not to have a sense of melancholy about the store that was founded in 1670. Though it hasn't been Canadian-owned for almost 2 decades. The desire to buy Canadian has never been stronger, but for consumers, it is not always easy to figure out what is Canadian-made and Canadian-owned. Anne Gaviola explains.
In a bid to buy Canadian, many are shunning American companies in favor of Canadian brands. But what exactly is Canadian enough? Take, for example, Timmy's.
Tim Hortons is an iconic Canadian brand, is no longer owned in Canada. It is largely owned by a Brazilian company.
Local franchisees are Canadian, creating jobs in Canada. What about Lululemon, founded in Canada, with an HQ in Vancouver but incorporated in the U.S.? Or Roots, a publicly held Canadian brand listed on the TSX.
Patriotism is not just about putting a maple leaf on a product. It's about supporting the businesses, the workers who really fuel the economy. So if you want to make a difference, you really need to look beyond the ownership and consider impact.
There are chat groups and Reddit threads dedicated to sussing out what exactly is Canadian enough. There's a lot of nuance.
McDonald's is a U.S.-based company, but has guaranteed that their burgers are made with Canadian beef. And so which trade-off are you going to make?
Another example, Lazy Boy, an American company, but franchise owners in the Lower Mainland say consumers boycotting U.S. companies should consider unintended consequences.
My wife, my brother, and I, we're the local owners. If people are boycotting an American brand, they're hurting their community, they're hurting their neighbors.
I think there are consequences to making Canadianness a purity test. If we dismiss companies because they don't check all the boxes, we risk pushing investment and jobs out of the country.
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says this trade war could cost the average household $1,900 per year. And public anger over a trade war no one asked for is palpable.
It seems a little foolish from the States to be putting these tariffs on us right now.
You're going to have people out of work, businesses run down, and the man is a madman.
The hope is that in this economic battle, consumers are careful about who exactly becomes collateral damage. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
There's a big development about Ukraine. It says it's ready to accept a 30-day ceasefire. The breakthrough came at high-level talks between Ukraine and the U.S. in Saudi Arabia. In exchange, the U.S. will resume its flow of military aid and intelligence to Ukraine. But as Redmond Shannon reports, all of this is subject to Russia's approval.
11 days after that Oval Office shouting match, which led to the U.S. pausing its support for Ukraine, a face-to-face meeting. After hours of talks away from the cameras, the result was very different.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict.
Not Ukraine started this war, but Ukraine ready for just and lasting peace.
Going into the talks in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine had only proposed a partial ceasefire. This deal would be a full 30-day pause and could be extended. In exchange, Washington agreeing to get behind Ukraine again.
The president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
The ceasefire plan, however, needs Russia to agree.
We hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball's now in their court.
Since taking office, Donald Trump has heavily criticized Ukraine and has not publicly demanded any Russian concessions, although he has hinted at new sanctions. The US will be asking Russia to stop fighting, just as Moscow's troops appear to be making progress in regaining control of its Kursk region. The joint statement after the meeting said the two sides did not directly discuss that contentious minerals deal, nor whether the United States would be involved in ensuring Ukraine's future security. But they did talk about what they called the importance of releasing prisoners of war and returning Ukrainian children forcibly taken by Russia. Donna?
Redmond Shannon in London. Thanks, Redmond. Before those talks began, Ukraine launched a fierce drone attack on Moscow. At least 3 people were killed, 17 others injured. President Trump has said Ukraine doesn't hold any cards, but as Mike Armstrong reports, it turns out it does.
The Russian capital was jolted awake early Tuesday morning by explosions. According to the defense ministry, Moscow alone was targeted by 91 drones. Most were shot down, but not all. The noise was terrible, this woman says. My heart couldn't calm down for hours. As cleanup crews took to the streets, Russian officials gave the breakdown. They say 343 drones were launched by Ukraine and tracked over their territory. In the Moscow region, the attack forced 4 major airports to temporarily stop flights and the suspension of train service. Other regions around the capital were hit as well, as was the area in and around Kursk, closer to the Ukrainian border. There are reports some of the drones hit oil facilities, others hit residential neighborhoods. One Ukrainian official says it was an important demonstration.
President Trump said Ukraine doesn't have cards. We try to show that at least some cards we do have.
Now, there were attacks overnight in the other direction as well. The Ukrainian Air Force says Russia fired a missile and 126 drones into its country. This was Odessa. But Ukraine targeting the Russian capital is something that hasn't happened as often.
I think this was a message. When it comes to these long-range weapons that Ukraine has developed, they can hit Moscow, and they can apparently hit it in large numbers.
The focus has for months been on targeting infrastructure and energy facilities in Russia to slow down its military. This attack may have been to remind people in the Russian capital there is a war underway. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
British police have arrested the captain of a cargo ship that crashed into an oil tanker that was anchored off the east coast of England. Aerial footage shows a massive hole in the side of the tanker, which was carrying jet fuel for the American military. One crew member is missing and presumed dead. The 59-year-old captain of the container ship faces possible charges of gross negligence manslaughter. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board is demanding urgent restrictions on helicopter routes near Washington's Reagan Airport. 67 people were killed when a military helicopter collided with an American Airlines jet as it was approaching the airport in January. The NTSB says the existing helicopter routes around the busy airport pose an intolerable risk to aviation safety. Detained and facing deportation coming up, the protests over the arrest of a U.S. permanent resident who could now be kicked out of the country.
Free, free, free Palestine!
In New York, demands are growing louder for the release of student activist Mahmoud Khalil. Demonstrations are also being planned in other American cities. Khalil, a permanent resident of the U.S. who holds a green card, was taken from his home by immigration agents on Saturday. A federal judge has blocked an immediate attempt by the Trump administration to deport him. As Jackson Prosco reports, it seems he's a test case for Trump's plan to expel what he calls troublemakers on college campuses.
As protests against the war in Gaza grew at Columbia University, Mahmoud Khalil became the face of the pro-Palestinian student movement.
Our movement is very, very large.
Nearly a year later, Khalil is now the test case for a Trump administration crackdown on alleged anti-Semitism on college campuses. The U.S. permanent resident with a green card was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents Saturday and moved to a detention center in Louisiana, where he now faces possible deportation.
Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists.
His fate is in limbo pending a court hearing. Attorneys acting on Khalil's behalf say his detention is both unlawful and unprecedented because he has not been accused of any crime.
What's abundantly clear is that this is a form of retaliation against Mr. Khalil exercising his First Amendment rights to speak out in support of Palestinian human rights.
The White House warns he is likely not the last protester to face retribution.
I think we ought to get them all out of the country. They're troublemakers, they're agitators.
It's like sort of something that you hear about happening in, like, you know, Russia, Nazi Germany, these places that, like, we've for so long pretended that we're not.
The crackdown doesn't stop with student protesters. Trump's education secretary has sent letters to 60 universities, including Harvard and Yale, warning they too face investigation and enforcement actions.
We will not stop, we will not rest.
The administration has already pulled $400 million in federal funding from Columbia, accusing the school of tolerating anti-Jewish racism. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Ahead, can you believe it's been 5 years? The lessons learned since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared. There is positive news about Pope Francis. The Vatican says he is showing significant signs of improvement. Doctors say the respiratory infection that led to his hospitalization last month is responding to treatment, and the Pope is no longer in imminent danger of dying. The 88-year-old, who has chronic lung disease, remains in the hospital. Well, you might want to forget it, but it was 5 years ago today that COVID-19 brought the whole world to a standstill. The World Health Organization declared a pandemic, and we were all plunged into a period of fear and uncertainty, a feeling not unlike the uncertainty we're feeling today with the trade war and the shifting world order. Heather Yourex-West explains.
In many ways, March 11th, 2020 feels like a lifetime ago.
The World Health Organization has now confirmed what many epidemiologists have been saying for weeks. The coronavirus is a pandemic.
In 5 years, so much has changed. Canada's would-be Prime Minister was steadying a different country that day.
The Bank of England's actions today comprise a timely and powerful package to support UK businesses and households.
And across this country, people had little idea how much life was about to change.
We got back actually from Africa the day before the airplanes all shut down.
We had to transition to online classes. It was difficult. It was lonely too.
It was sad. Many died alone. I had an aunt that did that. That happened.
While the era of mask mandates and social distancing has passed, the impact of the COVID pandemic lingers.
It's become one of these topics that nobody can really talk about without starting a fight. And that's really hard to be this polarized this far out.
The pandemic accelerated scientific advancement to see a vaccine developed in record time and helped businesses learn to pivot and adapt. It also devastated global economies, fueled inflation, and sowed division and distrust.
COVID has had a very major sociological and global impact in terms of how the world operates. And I don't think there's an easy path out of this. And I think we're certainly seeing that with these blatant attacks by the U.S. on the Canadian economy right now.
Things feel as uncertain as they did in 2020. An opportunity to draw on those hard-learned lessons of resilience, adaptation, and community that began for many 5 years ago. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
A measles alert has been issued for people who went to the Montreal Canadiens game on Monday, March 3rd. Public health officials warn an unvaccinated fan at that game has been diagnosed with measles. Fans in sections 111 to 117 and workers at the Tim Hortons and Pizza stands are warned to watch for symptoms over the next couple of weeks. Over the past 3 months, 36 measles cases have been reported in Quebec. A suspicious spike in sales of Teslas has sparked calls for Transport Canada to investigate. It relates to the federal government's zero emissions vehicle rebate program, which gave out $5,000 per electric vehicle sold. On January 10th, the government announced it would soon temporarily end the program as funds were running out. Public data shows that from January 10th to the 12th, 4 Tesla stores claimed roughly 8,600 sales. If you do the math, that is $43 million worth of rebates. Tesla has not commented. Lots of people have an opinion on Tesla, though. Next, the lengths people are going to boycott Elon Musk's car company.
Which is that one?
It's that red one in the middle.
I like that.
Yeah.
The American president turned the south lawn of the White House into a kind of Tesla showroom today. He is talking up Teslas, a show of confidence in Elon Musk, who he's put in charge of cutting federal jobs. Trump blames what he calls radical left lunatics for illegally boycotting Elon Musk's electric vehicle company. Tesla's shares fell hard on Monday as markets reacted to the threat of a recession and Trump's tariff plans. And a lot of people don't like the billionaire's influence and his attitudes, including how he's embraced far-right ideology. Neetu Garcha looks at how far the boycott Tesla movement is spreading.
These Tesla drivers are still happy with their choice.
I love this car. It was like 4 years I was waiting for this one.
They say they're saving money, not paying for gas, and feel it's a better choice for the environment.
I think if it gets a little worse, then I'll start to kind of, go around in my head thinking, maybe.
It's not a matter of maybe for many. The sale of a used Tesla at this BC dealership sparked several comments on social media.
People were suggesting that it was a symbolism of Nazi, of what's happening in the United States.
Canadians understand that we're in an existential trade war with the United States.
Drivers are sporting bumper stickers that read, "I bought this before Elon went crazy." Some competitors like Kia are capitalizing. Their sticker says, "I bought this after Elon went crazy." Protests have erupted across the U.S., with Tesla stocks taking a hit. Musk spoke on Fox News Monday.
How are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. I'm just here trying to make government more efficient.
Trump defended Musk in a post on his Truth Social platform, saying he's putting it on the line to help the country. The president even promising to buy a Tesla. It seems musician Sheryl Crow won't miss hers, waving goodbye to her Tesla.
When we get into murkier waters is when we start talking about things like vandalism. I think that's where we might see a backlash against the backlash.
And while the motive is unclear, there have been such reports on both sides of the border, from cyber trucks catching fire in a suspected arson in Seattle.
We're going to need to notify the ceasefire.
To charging stations being burned in Massachusetts, as Tesla drivers and critics face a crossroad, as charged with innovation as it is controversy. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. We are showcasing more of your Canada today. Jackfish Lake in Saskatchewan, Lac Lougère near Lantier, Quebec, and Skelton Lake near Boyle, Alberta. Keep them coming, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.